Today I have Mark Fielding. He's the Chief Commercial Officer for Eternal Bio, and we're going to be learning more about what Mark's doing and what the company's all about. But first, Mark, maybe you want to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you get to be doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to be here. I have worked. I'm old, so I've worked in and around food for about 30 years, in lots of different roles, lots of different types of companies, working for big CPGs, running my own startups. I'm a NED of a few early stage businesses now, but have found my niche around innovation. I get excited by shiny new things. And then linked to that consumer behavior. So I ended up doing a master's in behavioral science and human decision making because I worked for a customer insights business for a few years, actually, Daniel.
Yeah.
But it's always been around where innovation and where possible science and technology interact with food. And then increasingly, as I've got older, had kids, started to think more about the future, all of those kind of cliched things happened, then more and more focused on how can I, in my tiny little corner of the world, make a difference. So I now work exclusively for businesses that are climate friendly, climate conscious, trying to make a difference. So that's everything from I'm an investment director of a small vegan chocolate business where we're just trying to move people away from that. And then Eternal is the big bet, because that's about trying to make a significant dent in transferring a significant amount of the global population. It sounds very arrogant when we say it, but enabling people to move to a plant-based diet.
Great. And so how did you get involved? I mean, I think I first had interaction with Eternal Bio when I might have talked to one of the initial scientific founders. I think it was based in Argentina,
Okay.
if that sounds, and this was a while back. So maybe you want to give a little bit of a background of the company, how it's evolved. I mean, do you have a kind of an interesting geographical footprint, but
Yeah, we do.
So
Yeah, we
yeah.
do. And I think, I'll speak to the geographical footprint straight away. So for a relatively small business at the moment, we were founded in Argentina, and I'll come back to the founder story later. We have an office in the US as part of Mister, who are a Givaudan incubator.
Sure, I know that. Yeah.
Wonderful, by the way, if anybody doesn't know about them, if you're a big CPG or a small startup with interesting tech, particularly if it's planet friendly, you should speak to them. It's amazing, and that allows us to speak to US CPG companies. We then have an office in the UK, which is our route into EMEA and Europe and the EU. Production facilities, at the moment, we use third parties in China because there's availability and a skill set there. But we're in the process of building our own in Finland, because our main investor have existing business in Finland, and we're aware that an opportunity came up to buy a really big dairy site. And one of the benefits of what we do is that we can make food in a brownfield environment. So we never wanted to build greenfield. It's kind of against our ethos, the opportunity to take a site somewhere that isn't being used at the moment. I find it fascinating. It was a dairy that was right on the border between Finland and Russia, and was where finished production of dairy products was made for the Russian market. And with global events, that isn't such a great market at the moment, and don't know when it will be. So an opportunity came up for us to get a site, and we're putting in 1.5 million tons of fermentation there, which will be the biggest by far precision fermentation capacity in the world. Some sales guys to try and fill it, which is, a certain amount of pressure. So the company was founded by a guy called Horacio Acerbo, who is Argentinian, 100% purpose-based. Absolutely, this was not a business model that will layer on top, let's say planet friendly as a marketing tool. No, absolutely passionate about, angry about how our food system, or the damage that our food system does to our planet, determined to find a solution to it. And also, if you look ahead, just aware of some of the base numbers that 2050 were forecast to be 9.7 million people on this planet. We cannot feed them the way that we feed people now.
Yep.
The Western diet, the kind of high meat, high animal protein diet that we tend to eat in Europe and particularly the US, ignoring planet growth, if India and China or parts of Asia or Latin America sought to move to that diet now, as the BRICS countries get richer, they wanted to adopt the McDonald's and KFC. There isn't the land, there isn't the water, and we
Hmm.
certainly couldn't cope with the CO2. So we have to find a solution. So Eternals are fueled by a necessity. So
Hmm.
Horacio was, someone's got to do this. What's the best way of doing this? So he then went and looked around the world at what are the technologies that will make a difference. And I guess one of the key differences between Eternal and a lot of the more famous companies you will have heard of, we have no intention of launching a consumer brand. We're not
Hmm.
trying to fix this by being cool or being in your QSR or supermarket shelves. We're trying to find the ingredients that makes a difference and replaces those animal and meat ingredients. Um, that ingredient already exists or already existed. So the fundamental organism we use, called Fusarium venenatum, has been used by a UK business called Quorn. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Yep.
with them.
Sure.
Um,
Definitely. Yeah, they've been around for a while, actually. One of
about
the
40 years.
pioneers. Yeah.
About 40 years. And the origin story of that is that at the time, uh, big food and science combined together and said, what is, there are millions of fungi available to us that have lots of different properties. But many of them are high in protein and they grow really fast and they're really efficient. And there's quite a lot of magical things about fungi. So they did a huge study into what is the best fungi to replace meat. And that's a combination of its efficiency, how well can we work with it? How much does it grow? It's nutrition. So it's not just protein, it's protein with all of the essential amino acids. It's high in fiber. But critically, there's something in this organism, its structure. So the way it grows is called phyllo, but it grows in strands. If you can imagine, kind of, and it's not a mushroom, but if you rip open a mushroom, there's kind of a natural strands in there, and they're in this particular fungi, they're really good at replacing the texture of meat.
Okay.
So it's neutral tasting, slight mushroom flavor, slightly umami, but that nothing that good chefs and food developers can't do lots of things to. So it's a blank canvas. So
And can it be processed and like, mashed and extruded and things like this, or
yeah,
do you have to use it in a mass?
extrusion is generally a terrible idea because the reason we want to use this fungus is because of its natural texture. So if you
Right.
extrude it, you automatically, we've had people kind of get samples and extrude it and go, don't get
Why?
it.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
But no, it can be really easily processed. I mean, you could mash it into a burger or a chicken fillet with your hands at home. Um,
Okay.
there are certain things that you can put with it that improve its texture and you can do with it, but on its own, it's a pretty magical ingredient. So RHM as was, and Quorn found this and launched it as a brand really, really early days when vegetarianism and veganism was something weird hippies did,
Mm.
was very much an outlier. And I massively respect what they've done as a business, but I think in part a victim of their own history. Um, they're trying to grow this through a UK-based consumer brand that has affiliations with stuff happened a long time ago.
Mm.
Um, as they are as a business, they are not in a position to support meat alternatives in Malaysia or China or Latin America or the US. So the role of Eternal is to go, okay, we're going to take this organism and we're going to scale it as a B2B ingredient supplier. But the other thing that we've done, and where a lot of our development time went in the early days, was the technology that's used at the moment is 40 years old.
Mm.
Nothing, lots of our technology. I drive a car that hasn't, well, the electric cars now, but fundamentally, lots of things haven't changed. But lots of things have changed. So there are amazing things that we can do now with AI and machine learning. And I know everybody says that, but specifically what it allows us to do, we've built tools initially that allowed us to do experimentation with microscopes, but in 3 dimensions and in real time, and then use machines to process that. So if you think of you might have to go back to high school,
Mm.
but the putting something on a plate, watching it grow, looking through a microscope, recording it, that's really quite labor intensive. You can do
Mm.
that with a live 3 dimensional feed, and then you can change the input. So what if we slightly change the sugar? What if we warm it up, cool it down, add some water? How do we make this more efficient?
Mm.
With there being two end goals to that. One is, how do we use less? Because our job is to use less resources. So how do we use less water? How do we need sugar, right? Which comes from crops, which comes from, how do we use less sugar? How do we make this more efficient? And what goes alongside with that is, how do we make this cheaper? Because we firmly believe one of the big barriers to adoption of meat alternatives is they're still relatively quite expensive in most markets. We've got to get to a stage where you can have a great tasting alternative to meat that costs the same dollar for dollar, euro for euro. So,
or less if you're lucky, right? I mean, eventually,
we would love to get to less, and if you'll allow me to be political for a moment, we'd get to less by people not subsidizing meat in lots of markets.
Yeah, of course we could get into that, but I'm generally
Maybe
not.
not.
I'm generally not a fan of regulation in the economy. But I think in this particular case, a small amount of regulation would make a big difference.
But
Right?
but well, actually, we're trying to get away with regulation that exists that says you can claim massive subsidies for generating things that harm the planet. But right, probably not for today. So, what we have then is this computer vision system that lets us observe what's going on and analyze images. I mean, this is where the modern world is so cool. 10,000 times faster than you could do it in the old days with a higher level of detail. And that lets us work through thousands and thousands of experiments, which allows us to mess about with fungi strains, which I'll come back to, but we can help them grow faster. We can tweak it so the nutrition is better. We can mess about with taste and structure and cost. So it's basically this live experiment. That's now scaled up into something that goes into production. So it's there to experiment over here on a bench, but you can now put a version of that into huge production and observe everything that's going on to the second. The reason that's important is we're growing something that grows ridiculously fast. So it will grow 500% in a day. If you try and, a plant or a mushroom, you're talking about something that doubles in size every 5 hours. So I get told off for explaining it this way by our fungi experts. It's not a chain reaction. That's a terrible definition for a scientist, but for a layperson, it's a bit like that. You take this fungus, you put it on culture media and you feed it, and it grows really, really flipping fast. So we have to control that to the minute and the second. So we're able to then do that 3D microscopy, use the eye and the machine learning to very quickly understand what's going on. Because we've done all of the experimentation, we can dial down those inputs. So it's an engine management system, for want of a better stage, that then drives towards less inputs and lower cost.
And so sounds fantastic. Maybe going on to another point that you talked about, which was kind of global footprint and getting beyond maybe the corn concept.
Yeah.
That would potentially allow you, I would presume, to monitor different production facilities around the world, maybe not so much for optimization, but for quality control. I mean, you see this in a lot of food processing, just like processing natural products like potatoes and things like this. I mean, there's actually a lot of quality variation that goes on in different parts of the world because you have different inputs, but then of course you also have different conditions and things like this. So I would imagine that that's also kind of a competitive advantage for you, is that you have this tech that where you can keenly optimize things, that you would be able to then scale production to different places and not have to ship everywhere from your Finland
absolutely.
facility.
I mean, you still have all of the physical and fiscal challenges of building those facilities, but as our strategy stands at the moment, we intend to scale with a combination of working with third-party manufacturers and also our own plant and production, because to build a factory to do this takes 2 or 3 years and several $1 million. So to be able to scale as quickly as we would like, yeah, absolutely, we need to work with third parties. And for people who aren't familiar, you grow this stuff in fermentation tanks, which are very big stainless steel vessels, very similar to a process used for yeast and lots of other things. So we can take it for
wine, like you imagine like a wine production facility or something like that, where you have all these huge
not dissimilar,
okay.
yeah, but certainly things like yeast and antibiotics even are really similar production facilities. So we can work with people who have the infrastructure, the stainless steel, and yes, absolutely, we can manage and control that from a central point.
Okay.
Longer term, and something that we're working on at the moment, but will take a little while to come to fruition, is our guilty secret at the moment is that we use sugar to feed our organism as it grows. We know that can become circular. We know that we can use waste products from things like pea and wheat and soy production to provide a significant proportion of the ingredients, not everything.
Mm.
Nitrogen sources and simple sugars. So we are in conversations and we will get to the stage where when we build a new plant to make mycoprotein, it's next door to a dirty great big field that processes peas or whatever else, and we start to use those side streams to create a more circular economy.
Okay.
We haven't invented that. There are academic papers you can read on it. We have done lots of work to identify what side streams we can work with, and then because of the technology that I spoke about, our ability to control variability. So at the moment we use sugars, and they come into a specification. Moving to an organic byproduct, exactly as you said about potatoes, Daniel, that changes, but we've built the technology that allows us to control, so that says, okay, we're observing a difference in the byproduct, then this is what automatically needs to happen downstream.
Mm. Okay. And then ultimately you're going to sell this to end brands, ingredient producers. What's the business strategy in terms of the go to market?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So a B2B ingredient company.
Mm.
So we're pretty much agnostic. It isn't just meat use. Actually, we're working with people looking at it in dairy at the moment because it's neutral and it can give you a stretch and a texture, and it's high protein. A lot of old dairy, old cheese is really low in protein. Yeah, we're working with partners globally in different markets to try and achieve breakthroughs, and some of that is as we are not precious about the use for this. So there are people looking at hybrid products, so sausages and burgers and nuggets and things that are part animal and part. And we're working with smaller brands who are looking at who have cool branding and interesting ideas, but their products aren't great. They're too expensive, or not nutritious enough, or they don't taste good. And we're working with, and unfortunately, we have a lot of NDAs in place. But we're working with a bunch of big CPGs about, okay, how do we commercialize this at scale? A big part of our time spent the last few months to try and help that B2B publicity has been, we're in the final of something called the X Prize. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, sure. I've heard of it. Yeah.
So we've managed to get to the final. So there's 6 finalists in the X Prize, and we've just submitted our final written submission, and we're sending a bunch of stuff for tasting. But it's a $50 million prize fund, but the publicity from that will be huge because the judging is incredibly rigorous. And for that, we've had to produce a chicken breast alternative. So what we're trying to do as a business now, rather than just saying, hey, we've got this great ingredient, is to say, look at this amazing chicken breast that you make mainly with our great ingredient. Oh, and by the way, it has, hopefully, fingers crossed, won the X Prize or has done this. So we're starting to do more applications work so that there are, if not the finished product, there's a very close to a finished product ready to go off the shelf. So you're interested in making so working on those applications.
And so I would presume then that you need to also help your customer in formulation work. Like it's not just one product that you're going to be rolling out. Basically, and this I think is it's a big challenge, but also an opportunity for B2B ingredient companies is when they have a novel ingredient, they come and they say, look, it's a novel ingredient, it has all these fantastic applications, but you as the end brand or the company that's going to put a package on it and a label and put it in the store, you don't have the expertise or the time or the equipment to figure out how to make it work for your product. So you not only need to produce a great ingredient substrate, but you need to learn how to formulate food too, right? Which is a huge
absolutely. And look, wherever possible, we're not trying to reinvent things. So we have partnerships with third parties who are product development experts. And absolutely what you said, but it's a fine line because you don't particularly, and I'll use these, we are not talking to them, so I will use them as an example. You don't turn up to McDonald's and say, this is how you make a burger, right? They have forgotten more about making burgers than we will ever know.
Yet they still rely on suppliers to do a lot of their innovation. Many of
they absolutely
these QSRs.
Do. They absolutely do. So for us, what we're trying to do is get to the stage of where we can show examples and we can say, what we know now about our ingredient, what we have learned is that, it plays well with these ingredients. It doesn't play well with those ingredients. This is how you get the best flavor profile from it. This is how it processes best. This is how, if you want that water content, we recommend this. So we're starting to build that bank of knowledge, which was enabled for us. Because to be totally open, my investors weren't terribly happy with us spending lots of money making things when we're so focused. We want to make the best ingredient. But because of the opportunity on X Prize, we had to go and do some R&D. So it's been a natural follow on from there that we've learned and developed and run with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, tell your investors for what it's worth. We work a lot with the ingredient companies as a consumer research provider and also as a platform provider. And I think the more and more ingredient companies are looking to go into this kind of premium ingredient space, which a lot of times just means what can we sell, which is complicated, then not just a commodity, and therefore requires that we would need to also add some formulation services into this because then of course your margins expand, right? Because you're not only differentiating yourself based on the food that you're giving them, the input, but then you're also differentiating yourself on a service offering, which is a lot more varied. Like you can be really good at service, you can be really responsive, you can be really innovative. I think that those are things which some of these really top flavor companies and whatnot really invest a lot in. Of course, they still are producing the commodities. That's kind of how they make money, right? But
Yeah.
When their customer base looks at them and says, well, this sort of so and so supplier is a great innovation partner, right? So I need to make sure to do enough business with them so that when I come to them with innovation problems around their product, they'll work with me, right? Rather than just tell me, okay, no, that's not worth it, right? Because and they're investing a lot of money in this, in briefs that they probably never make ROI on, but they're doing that because of the relationship that they're kind of building with the PepsiCos of the world and others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I'm glad you said the quite a bit out loud about that, deliberately making it complicated to increase their
Yeah.
margin. You said that, not me.
Well, I mean, I think it's necessary. Otherwise,
Yeah,
they would never be able to get, because otherwise the food producer would say, well, look, I have to make money here. I need to make a margin. And if you can't help me to put this, sweet reduction or whatever it is into my product, I don't have the capacity to focus on it. And so they just don't do it. It just doesn't become part of their agenda because their organization is structured around making profit in a particular way. And so they'll just kind of keep turning the crank doing that. And it does require innovation, companies that are small or large to come along and say, look, we have this new thing and we can help you make it work, right? I think it's
yeah,
necessary. Yeah.
yeah. The challenge for us is not trying to. So we're a really simple company, right? We've got one ingredient. You can buy a powdered version if you wish. So we could stretch that to say we've got two, but um, we have to be conscious of what we're able to do at this stage in our development. We don't have the scale and scope of some of these ingredients companies you're talking about. So we have to be good at something. We've got to be quite limiting the bandwidth of what we seek to be good at. Um,
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenges, and again, just speaking like one of the challenges we have, because we've spoken to a whole bunch of ingredients companies, lots of them get quite excited about our product, but actually what the end product is quite a wet biomass. We need to work on marketing phrases because wet biomass is the best description, but it looks kind of like a tuna paste that you can then process and
Mm-hmm.
you can dry and you can do things with. But it's a wet, soggy fungus, which means that we can autoclave and sterilize that, but it doesn't fit the business model of most of the large ingredient companies who are really good at dry goods in a dry warehouse,
Mm-hmm.
sending it around the world. So actually, what we have is something that is actually a bit of a challenge for lots of those ingredients companies because they don't like frozen things and they don't like things that are, I'm going to say high risk, which it isn't exactly, but relative to a bag of pea flour, um,
Mm-hmm.
you have something that there are logistics challenges to it that mean that we're more likely to go direct than honestly I thought we were 18 months ago when I was talking about go-to-market strategy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I expected to be less direct and more through ingredients companies, but it seems we're a little bit complicated for that.
I guess if I were in your position, I would think that makes perfect sense, right? Like, I mean, you don't want to go through one bureaucratic and, large organization that has other priorities to get to another one. If you can go direct and work directly with the end user, which is, it sounds like in your case, it's like a CPG company, that's of course the best route to
Yeah.
market, I think. Yeah. It may not scale super well because you don't have the distribution capacity and things like this of a global company, but you could always partner up for that later on once you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, so
Right.
look,
So
the
yeah.
cliche we use and the line I've used with investors is we get to scale by working with people who already have it. So I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier this. Um, I hear and read a lot of noise in Europe and the US and the UK about, oh, plant-based is dead, it was a fad, and then people give examples of some brands that are struggling or have gone away, and I look at that and I spent in a similar related business to you, Daniel, but I spent 7 years testing innovation in food. And
Mhm.
the default everybody has is that 95% fail. So
Right.
if you did any sort of academic look at the plant-based market and just took plant-based out and said, well, what's going on here? There are lots of small businesses, you know, shiny new ambitious entrepreneurs launching brands without the funding or the backing or the support with crazy new ideas. They're somehow getting space on shelf, and then after a certain amount of time, there's a reckoning, and lots of those brands disappear. Well, that is true of every category in CPG. There's
Mhm.
nothing unique. I think that we should separate the signal from the noise here. Small startup food business that was underfunded failed doesn't signifies nothing about the future of meat alternatives. The future of meat alternatives are driven by a necessity, right? You can have your own opinion of what you think of it as a consumer, but fundamentally, if we need to feed the planet, we need to find alternatives to meat. Even if you don't believe in global warming, we don't have the water and the land. If you do believe in
Yep.
global warming, that pinch point is an awful lot earlier. Um,
Yep.
so you don't have to be a vegan, you don't have to be vegetarian, you just have to accept that we don't have the space for the people that we're going to have. We've got to find other ways of doing it. If you aren't someone who has vegan or vegetarian tendencies, that solution might be to find an exponentially more efficient way of growing animals.
Mhm.
That
Oh, but I think it's a very interesting point you're raising because I think number one, the fact that 95% of products fail is probably more linked to the innovation process and the decisions that are made along the way, less than to the underlying industry or idea,
yeah,
right? Like I don't know if there's been research done on that. I think it's difficult to parse those things out. But the other thing is that, so much of these things are directional, but the timing is very difficult. I mean, if you look at like just back to 2008 when there was so much effort put into alternative energy, right? I mean, Obama, I think, funded tons of, government projects that went, a lot of went nowhere. I think I even know people in Silicon Valley that got like tens of hundreds of millions and, the company doesn't exist anymore. Yet, here we are looking at energy mix and, wind, solar, et cetera, is just in the normal parlance of these governments now, right? I mean, you can make arguments about what is right, what is wrong, but it's there, right? It's moving. So I think the timing of all this is very important. So
so look, I think if you it's really interesting the lens that you look it through. So it's a great point. Everyone thinks it's Uber. Like Uber worked out the blocks immediately.
mhm.
Um, so the cars you got were as good as the cars you got from a traditional taxi. They were
this,
just
yeah, the switching cost was very low for
right.
the end user, right?
Whereas
Like,
if you look and if you look from a flavor wiki lens at this, why haven't some of these brands work? Okay, well,
mm,
were they cost competitive?
yeah,
Were they marketed? Was the go-to-market good? Did they taste good?
mm,
Did they have an ingredient list and nutrition that matched up with the perceptions of lots of people who were switching for health reasons?
mm,
No, there was
yeah,
some, can I say shitty? I mean, a
mhm,
lot of shitty products launched that didn't taste good, that had a really long ingredients list. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you might accept that. If you're one of to scale, it's got to appeal to, the next people off the taxi rank will be
mhm,
people who eat this because it's healthier, because it's lowering cholesterol, because it's higher in this, because it's better. Turn a lot of these products over, and it's a science kit. Um,
yeah.
So the reason we came up with, or the reason that we work with the organism we do, is that there's 6 ingredients in our chicken breast, right? And they're all things that you have heard of, that you might find in a kitchen cupboard. And it tastes great. So we have to give, before we can expect this to scale, the rules of the game are the CPG rules, not the tech rules. So we've got to have
Right.
something that meets consumer expectations, right? On taste, and quality, and health and nutrition, the ingredients that are in it. I think one that's overlooked is it's got to be easy to work with. So it's not just eating, it's cooking. We need to get into people's homes. Everybody knows what to do with a burger or a steak or a chicken breast. We need to provide an alternative where you don't need to rethink what you do. If you are someone who cooks curries or stir fries, or whatever it is that you do, we're just switching in a seamless way. And then the other thing that you will know, again, with your background, is the biggest single dictating factor, and this, academic studies support this, if a product launch is successful, is the level of support. Because the biggest single dictator of how consumer brands grow is about availability. It's about mental availability and physical availability. And again, academic studies support that. So if you're a small brand, you're automatically struggling. PepsiCo can launch something and you will have heard of it and be able to buy it from Monday.
Right.
I launched in 500 stores in California with, the fact that it's in the news in New York for a week is irrelevant. I can't buy it. So everything's weighted against you as a small startup brand. And if your product isn't perfect. So we kind of come at this from not a massive surprise, really. What we know is, and I don't think I'm giving secrets away here, but of the big CPG companies that we're talking to, they all have plant-based divisions, right?
Right.
So even businesses that you maybe haven't got anything in market yet, or if they have, it's a sub-brand and you don't know it or associate it, they have teams of really, really clever people working on this because they know it's coming.
And do you think that, but first of all, I completely agree with you on all that. I mean, we've worked with some of these big CPG brands and we've seen, the success or lack thereof of some of those initiatives, right? I can't speak about them in specifics, but do you believe that it's the reason that they're kind of waiting to activate that huge distribution and marketing pipeline is because the products aren't good enough yet, or that they also know that the market acceptance is coming along gradually and that I mean, of course, they're very good at understanding, look, like we're not going to take shelf space unless it's going to be, value added for us, right? And we'll just take it
Yeah.
out.
So this is just my opinion. So my last sentence is related to things that I know are true because I've read the studies, right? My opinion on this is it's a little bit of both. So we're working on fixing product for them, right? That's we exist to make those products that don't just taste good, but are cost effective and also are super nutritious and super healthy and don't have a load of weird stuff in them. So we can work with them to deliver that. My own personal observations of what large CPG does is they're fast followers. There's very little innovation that actually comes out of these big businesses because there doesn't need to be. They will scoop up and buy, that really super cool product or brand at a 20 million, 50 million, 100 million valuation, and that's cheaper than running your own. So lots of these big CPG companies are effectively VCs in a way, right? So I think it's a combination that the product isn't there, but the really big household name brands tend not to go first.
Right. Okay.
So we'll see. And again, there's conversations that I'm having that I can't go beyond that. But
And do you think there's a bet on a particular technology? I mean, in general, you
well, yeah,
have,
I've got
correct me
some
if I'm wrong. You've got
I've
like
got some bias in that, right?
you've got extruded plant protein, right? Right. And then you've got mycoprotein, the
Yeah.
type of thing that you're working on. And then you've got the other big one that I think fascinates everyone, which is cultivated meat, right? Like grown in the
Yeah.
lab. Yeah.
So I think cultivated meat is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because if we can present a product that is, you fundamentally can't tell the difference between that steak and this steak, but we're making it in a way that is planet and animal friendly. That's amazing. I haven't yet seen anyone who's got close to cost. I've met people who say they know how to get there and that it's simply a function of scale and that all right, the cost of this, but we're growing it in a lab with 10 PhDs huddled around there. It's, well,
Right.
of course, that's an expensive burger. So I don't know. I think if
Mm.
that ever gets close to being cost competitive, it's a game changer. It doesn't preclude what we're doing.
Mm.
We're talking about huge markets. So there's 312 billion in just poultry in just the US alone. You take that globally. I I do think one of the things I always like to mention when, and I'm not suggesting you are, Daniel, but if anyone listens to this who may be cynical about the growth, is look at alternative dairy.
Mm.
There's no scandal. There's not a lot of noise around it at all. Um, it's a 3 billion market in the US. It's growing 11% a year. It's completely normal, whether it's shopping for our home or going into a coffee shop. And do you want oat? Do you want? It's normal.
Yeah,
It's
I think in the
normal.
US and probably UK especially now, I think it's in the US they say it's like almost it's 10 or 15%. I don't know the number of the dairy market is alternative type milk products. But even that is enough to have significantly disturbed typical dairy cooperatives, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's the other thing that I think folks don't realize is that like there are breaking points in all of these markets, right? Like if you look at books, right? What Amazon
Yeah,
did
yeah,
to
yeah.
books, right? It
I
wasn't like, well, Amazon's gonna like, take 10% of the book market. I mean, that causes Barnes and Noble to have to start shutting stores, right? And once they start shutting stores, the supply in the market of traditional book purchasing is gone, right? It goes from there one day to gone the next day. And I think that this could, of course, it's not great for farmers and meat producers. This also is something that similar could happen. Like you don't need to take 30% of the meat market from Tyson, right? You only need to have acceptance of like 5 to 10% of that market to start significantly disrupting other supply chains, right? And I think then you start to see a tipping point, maybe price parity. A lot of things start to happen in the balance of the market, right? I think there's a lot
Yeah,
of
possibly. I mean,
I think folks maybe don't necessarily understand that, right? Is that like you don't need to replace every meat consumer, right, with a
no,
consumer.
but you said something like it's not necessarily good for farmers. I would say it's not necessarily bad for farmers. So if you take dairy, so in the UK particularly, but in the EU, there's been a scandal about actually the proportion of the cost of milk that goes back to farmers has been tiny. I
Mhm.
helped test supermarket versions of this that were called Milk for Farmers, and will how much more will consumers pay if that goes back to farmers? I We have cows. We have a selection of milks in our house. So we have cow and O. The cow milk is delivered to my door in a glass bottle by a
Mhm.
local farmer, like it was 100 years ago. That's better for
Mhm.
the farmer. It's better for the environment. It's maybe the question is why on earth are we shipping raw milk 100 miles to be processed to then ship it 1,000 miles to then? But that I was more coming in from a consumer point of view that we didn't have any of these or much less of these conversations about, will people switch? All the noise around it was just, and I think because we gave an alternative that you could immediately switch, as you'd said, right? Can't
Mhm.
forgotten. Um, that they taste subtly different. Some people prefer them, some people don't. But it's immediately switchable from a consumer perspective. So
Right.
the cost to switch from, particularly in your latte at Starbucks, there is zero cost to switch.
Right. Right.
And I think if you compare that to where we are with alternative meats, it's, well, we're not, most of the products on the market aren't there yet. But what
Yeah.
we've seen with dairy is it doesn't have to even be noisy, right? It just happens. We give shoppers, consumers, people a good enough alternative in all of those ways about cost, quality, scale, health. Switching will
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, I don't eat the products that often because I'm not a big meat eater, but like every once in a while I have a non-meat burger in a restaurant or something like this. Actually, I think it's better in some ways. It's definitely not the same as eating a piece of meat if you think about it. But for me, who I don't eat a lot of meat, it doesn't I don't have the same kind of digestive related issues, right? Because it's like it's just easier to eat that substance for me than eating a burger. And for me, the experience is almost the same, right? Particularly when you have all the other associated things next to it. And we eat some plant extruded chicken products in our house there's this product here in Switzerland called Planted, which is pretty good in certain applications, right? Like, is it the replacement for cutting a chicken breast? No, it's not, I don't think. But in other places, like in a burrito or something, it works just fine. Right. So I think that I think consumers will continue to gravitate towards this, which brings me to my next question, which maybe as we're getting closer to the end of our time, what do you think that the funding cycle for all of this looks like? Is it more like investors start to look at these types of products as maybe like as they do pharma, because it's totally normal for investors to put millions of dollars into a new drug and realize that it may go nowhere, right? And they just realize that there's this kind of timing cycle of bringing a product to the market. Do you think that this segment starts to become a bit more like that versus, starting a new
Un
brand of tennis shoes, right?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not.
Okay.
I'd love to
Yeah.
say yes. What we're
Yeah.
seeing and what we're hearing is that there's definitely a cooling, or
Mhm.
actually it's cooled. That happened a while ago. Um, so there's definitely a much more negative view about this. Getting money for anything in alternative meat is a lot harder now than it was 5, 10 years ago. I don't think we'll ever see pharma because it's much harder to protect
Mhm.
a food product.
And probably less margin once you get it in the market, right?
Yeah,
Much
probably.
less. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably. So, you make the big bet on pharma, but then you own it for 20 years.
Right.
And you get it on prescriptions, and there's a fixed volume to it. And, the generics come out 20 years later, but I'm not an expert in that field. So I don't think we're there yet. So no, it is a tough market out there in terms of investors and financials. And I think personally, and again, no, just an opinion. I think what we'll see is the in market, the big food companies will fund the next rounds of this. It won't be Silicon Valley. Um,
Hmm.
it will be, you just use your Barnes and Noble explanation. So if you're a dairy company or you're a meat company and you're looking 10, 20 years out, how do you
Hmm.
mitigate against that? Well, you need your own version of the alternative, right?
Right. Right.
If you
Yeah.
looked at the people in our pipeline, there would be some eyebrows raised at, don't they do animals? Aren't they the evil empire enemy? And no, the solution is a transfer. So if I was betting where most of the money will come from in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be existing big food,
Yep.
investing in
Yeah.
in, in growth or protecting its future. It won't be. And then maybe you'll, if we do have the breakthrough, you'll then get a follow on from third parties. But um,
Yeah,
yeah,
because they have the distribution mechanisms, and as I said before, they have like the diversified P&L to be able to suffer a little bit in a fledgling
yeah.
segment,
But also because it's flashing red as a threat at their board table. It's not just this opportunity. Well, maybe the opportunity's gone or isn't there. It's
Hmm.
if you everybody's going to have the blockbuster Barnes and Noble conversation, right?
Hmm.
If you don't do
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
where are you going to be? Everybody's going to talk through the thing that you said about, if you lose 10%, you're closing a store, you're closing a factory. Where does that
Yeah.
go?
Yep.
So I know a bunch of these companies because they're who we're talking to, are the people who are saying, okay, what does the food mix look like? How do
Mm.
we make sure we retain our scale and market share of that new food mix?
Right. Yeah, which they've been doing for a long time, right? Like there's been other innovations that they did this with, right? I don't can't have any that come immediately to mind, but actually one like well, Kobani is not a good example because they really went all at it alone. But if you look at like things like snack bars and whatnot, I mean, these were not an in thing to do 20 years ago, and now you see all the big brands getting into them and
Yeah,
developing them
so
in
you
a
you
big
could
way,
look at that
right?
kind of
So,
that whole protein market of the protein bars and stuff. Look who owns the big protein
mm,
brands now. Look, the snack bars that you're buying. Look who actually owns those, and it's that
yeah.
part of that has been that acquisition or fast follow route, and part acquisition route or fast follow. So I don't think there's massive surprises there.
Okay. What about the Asian market? The Asian market's a little bit different, right? It's quite diversified. There's not as much presence of these big brands there. Have you, I mean, being in an international scope, do you have an opinion
Yeah,
on how
so
that
we we
differs?
we, we have a couple of clients in Asia already where we have a series of conversations running. Um, it is fascinating because their existing food systems are different. Um,
Mm.
but if I give you an example, so we'd never really prioritize India, despite the fact that it's the most populous nation on the planet now, because we didn't think they had a particularly meat-heavy diet, and we didn't think that was a thing. We have been approached by and are in conversations with people in India because they have a massive diabetes problem because of their diet, and there's a solution to that by putting more protein into the diet, and because of the amount of vegetarians already in that country, right?
Mm.
So yes, we have clients in Asia. We are talking to people in Asia. I mean, our production at the moment is in China.
Okay.
There are some regulatory challenges. So mycoprotein. One of the other things that's helped us is getting a novel food approved is challenging. Um,
Hmm.
it takes GRAS status in the US, and what we make isn't novel because corn went before us, and actually it exists in the EU before there even were novel food regulations. Corn was already in market,
Mm.
but they haven't expanded significantly in Asia. So this is a
Mm.
new ingredient in some of those markets, and therefore there are regulatory steps,
Okay.
which is challenging and takes time.
And do you have any connection with corn other than using a similar ingredient, or do you guys work with them, or
Not.
is
I mean,
that yeah.
we have met them. We were both part of something called the Fungi Protein Association, which is relatively new, and
Yeah.
which is an attempt to work together where we can to move the industry forward. The meat guys have done it forever. The dairy guys have done it forever. Can we all use similar terminology and similar language to make it easier for people to understand what this
Mm.
is? Because one of the barriers we have is it's fungus. Can't call it a mushroom. It's not. Um,
Mhm.
again, you do consumer research. It's not sexy, right?
Yeah, I mean, the insect protein thing kind of suffered from this. It didn't really work because of that put off by, I mean, in
Yeah.
my mind, this is very different than insects, but
No one knows what mycoprotein is. Fungus
yeah.
is not naturally. Mushroom would be okay, but fungus is not something that what's the tea, Dad? Fungus
Mm. Yeah.
is. We're a little bit away from that being sexy. So interesting. There are people using different names. So mushroom root is a term that's being used in the US. So
Mm.
yes, we are loosely affiliated with other people in this space because we're not really competing with corn, and we're not the only other company doing mycoprotein. Um,
Right.
but we're not really competing with them. We're competing with $300 billion of chicken in the US.
Yeah, I mean, if the market grows, everybody benefits, right? Because
Yeah.
and there's some others. I mean, mycotechnology in the United States, I'm not sure if they do exactly what you're doing. I think they have a pretty diversified portfolio. They've grown a whole lot in the past couple of years. Trying to think of others, but yeah,
There's
I think
yeah, there's a bunch of them, and I think look that my assumption is they all got to the same place that when the alternative meat market is going to grow, what's the best ingredient? And if you
right.
go through that logically, unless you think you can invent something new and better, then actually mycoprotein is where it's at. And then the challenge with new and better is you then have to not just invent it, but get it regulated. So
Mm-hmm.
scratch off 3 years and a million plus.
Yep. 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 Well, so what's next? Kind of final moments here. Like, what can you tell us about that we might look for in the future from you all in the next couple of years? I mean, by the way, I have to say that since I first met your founder a couple of years ago, I think through one of these conferences, seems like you've come really a long way. You're getting, got a customer base. You're working with some big companies, so it looks like very good progress. From what I can discern, I know you can't disclose details.
No, no.
So,
So look, the big thing for us is we're building this site in Finland. So we switched from working with third parties to our own production, and it's that look, our investors are taking a massive gamble because we are building production capacity that keeps me awake at night. Like
yeah.
if you ask the sales guy, which is me, how big do you want this factory to be, it would not be this big.
But
Um,
you can operate it at partial scale, okay,
Yeah,
as,
we
as
can
well.
operate
Yeah,
at
okay.
partial scale. We can do contract manufacture for other things in other fermentation. We may ferment for other mycoprotein businesses. But
Right.
they've come at it from the point of view of one of the biggest challenges for us and other people fermenting other things, including cultivated meats. Cultivated meat can be created in similar conditions. is that there isn't the capability and the capacity there. So we're not only building the massive factory with the really large vessels, but we're building a facility that allows us and others to go from pilot to scale. So
Mhm.
essentially, it's the size of, so the big fermenters we're building are 250,000 litres. You might have something that's 6 or 10 on a desk and put the steps in between. So it won't just be eternal myco food that we'll make there. We will become a CDMO. So that's a big part of our journey. That allows us to support some of these conversations and trials and tests that we've done with big food, because it's now like, yes, we can support you globally, not there's other steps in the chain. And then the thing that I haven't spoken about that I love getting into conversations because it's cool and because you have a space shuttle behind you, is that we're also working with NASA.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I
It's
mean it makes tons of sense, right? Like, because if you can make the food in a closed environment, right? Like it's perfect for something like that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
NASA are
Yeah.
running something called the Deep Space Challenge, and we've won phase one and phase two of that, and it's just so cool. Like, if we're going to go to Mars, it's going to take 6 years. How do we feed people for 6 years? Um, and I can't remember the sums, but the maths on like what each kilo that you shoot out of the atmosphere and into space costs. You know,
Yeah.
we're not packing tin beans for 6 years because how big does the rocket have to be? So
Yeah.
we've developed essentially a desktop version of the factories that we've built, and
Yeah.
then it's a really good exercise for us because it's all about what is the least amount of everything that we can use to get the most amount of nutritious food. And it's,
Yeah.
you know, what NASA are driving towards. And we know this, we know what they're amazing at is how do we make this a microgram lighter, 0.5% more efficient?
Right.
So that's exciting, and I like talking about it because it's cooler than talking about fungus. But
But
also,
isn't that fascinating how like the drive in one space in one area, like, to go into space, which is like it's like colonizing space, like it's pretty far away, but like, you start to see glimpses of it. But certainly like in my lifetime, I'm not sure that regular people will be living in on the moon. But you see how it drives all this innovation in other areas too. Like it
yeah,
drives all
absolutely.
critical thinking. I think it's so interesting how that kind of thing works,
There are
right?
so many
So,
innovations that have come out of the US space program, NASA, and I find it fascinating. When, you know, we talk in long terms about innovation. That computers are amazing, but you look at how quickly we got from the Wright brothers to on the moon.
in the grand scheme of human evolution, yeah, it's kind of
That was
scary,
in the
right?
grand scheme of
Yeah.
human evolution. That was an afternoon.
Yeah.
We,
But
you know,
you also see like between the Industrial Revolution and now how much damage we've done to the core of all that, right? So it's like it's sort of a double-edged sword in many
yeah, we're
ways.
not advocating commuting in rockets. That would be against our core ethos of reducing carbon. But it does. I mean, it does. It works really well for us as a business to work with, you know, the absolute experts in the field who can help us just drive with efficiency, do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. And you know, it's a brilliant ecosystem for us to be part of because there are lots of people. Our place at Cape Canaveral, the guy next door is basically Iron Man.
Mm,
He's 3D printing spacesuits because if your spacesuit breaks 2 miles from home,
mm,
what do? You can't have 10 spares in a wardrobe because of,
right.
so it's that infrastructure and ecosystem is amazing for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, we very, very cool. Listen, great talking to you. Thanks so much for the time. Going to be taking a look and seeing what's going on. We'll obviously post your website and all the places where people can contact you when we publish this little session. But
Cool.
it's great to talk to you. Great. I love talking to entrepreneurial people that are seeing the world from all these different angles. I learn more and more things even about what I'm doing when I talk to folks about these different things. So I appreciate it. Yeah,
Okay, cool. Thank you.
great.